All right, let's do this. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter number 1, please. What I'd like to do, I'm going to start a study with you, and I don't know how long it'll last, on the temple, all right, the Jerusalem temple. And let me show you where here we go. The first mention of the word temples in 1 Samuel chapter number 1 and verse number 9 here, all right? So let me read that to you. It says, "Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord." Now at this time was the temple built? Well, no, it wasn't. So what was he sitting by here? He's sitting by the tabernacle, all right? It's called the tabernacle or the tent. And then in some places I found in my studies, it is called the temple, because this is where God came, all right, to manifest himself now to the nation of Israel. And of course, you can read, excuse me, about that and how it got going back in Exodus, all right? You pick it up in Exodus 21, you read through the rest of the book of Exodus, and you can see how God gave Moses there a vision. He showed him the pattern that it was to be built after, and of course that's what they did. All right, that's what they did. So let's come back to 2 Samuel then, chapter number 7, and we'll get going here. Now, someone might say, Brother Dan, why are we going to study this thing on the temple? Well, I think there's some things we need to understand. As a futurist and a premillennialist, I was convinced that there was going to be another temple built in Israel, in Jerusalem, at the site of the old one, okay? But as I've been studying and reading and doing historical accounts of this, what I found was this, and I'll just give you the bottom line. The temple was one of the causes of the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And you pick that up during the four Gospels and then in the Acts, all right? Some of the messages that are shown to us during the Acts period. And actually what you read about in the Gospels is that Christ was head to head with the terms of the temple and the people and what they thought about the temple. Now, I'm not going to give you the whole history tonight, but it's interesting to me as I've been through a lot of the historical business about the temple, that most of the Jewish people wanted nothing to do with it, right? And it wasn't because of the idea that God was there, because actually in the second temple, which we'll see probably next week or so, it never mentions that God came down and filled it with glory, okay? So whether that happened or not, it was never recorded, okay, as we see that. So at any rate, it's an interesting study as you go through it, and to me it's very eye-opening as to God's desire to be with man, okay, or with men. Now, just to back up a little bit, a lot of folks believe that the reason God created the universe was for a home for himself to live in. And then that was taken to the earth, and then ultimately to the we call it the Garden of Eden, okay, where he would be meeting with man. Of course, he did meet with Adam and Eve, that sort of thing, okay? But after man sinned, then it's not brought up again, all right, until we get to Moses and the tabernacle. So let's follow the history a little bit. And I have to apologize to you because I was supposed to make an announcement Sunday morning and ask you to read some passages, all right, out of Kings and out of Chronicles, and so that you'd have a head start on this, but I forgot to do it. So here we are, and we'll just have to go through it tonight. So let's go to 2 Samuel in chapter number 7, if you would, okay, if you're not there already. And here we find David's desire to build a temple, all right, to build a temple. And as you look at this, let's pick it up in, well, we'll go from 1 down to 7, I think here. Yeah. It says, "Now came about when the king lived in his house, and the Lord had given him rest on every side from all his enemies." This is King David, All right. That the king said to Nathan, the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells within tent curtains." All right, within the tent. Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that is in your mind, for the Lord is with you." But in the same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and say to my servant David, Thus saith the Lord, are you the one who should build me a house to dwell in? Question mark. For I have not dwelled in a house since the day I brought up the sons of Israel from Egypt, even to this day. But I have been moving about in a tent, even in a tabernacle." So there's your tabernacle of Moses that we see. Okay. Verse 7. Wherever I have gone with all the sons of Israel, did I speak a word with one of the tribes of Israel, which I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, "Why have you not built me a house of cedar?" So they've gone all these years, and God's asking, I never told anybody, did I, to build a house? Well, he didn't, okay? So what we have next then is this, in the passage, is that God makes a covenant with David concerning, who's going to rule after him, so on and so forth. So let's pick it up now in verse number 12, because now we're back to a temple context. "When your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendants after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever, for the ages," if you want to say that, okay? So we know that descendant of David, of course, is going to be Solomon, okay, according to the scripture. But notice what it says here, all right, as you look in verse number 13. "He shall build a house for my name." Now, you ought to circle that, because as we go on further, which we're going to do, you're going to see the main reason that God had a temple built was for his name. All right? For his name. And we'll talk about that again in just a minute. So let's go to 1 Kings now, if you would. All right? 1 Kings. And we want chapter number 5. 1 Kings chapter number 5. Now here in the first few verses, first 5 verses, we see David had a friend named Hiram, king of Tyre, verse number 1. So now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard. Now Hiram was a friend of David, okay, but it continues on to Solomon. When he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend to David. Then Solomon sent word to Hiram, saying, "You know that David, my father, was unable to build a house for the name of the Lord." There it is again. "His God, because of the wars which surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. Behold, I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. The Lord spoke to David my father, saying, Your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, he will build the house for my name." All right? So we notice that, don't we? All right? For my name. Now do this with me. Come back to Exodus in chapter 20. Keep your hand here. I'm coming. We'll be right back. Exodus 20. Now, of course, in Exodus 20, what happened there? That's where the 10 Commandments were given, weren't they? Okay. Here's Exodus 2, 9, 16. I'll be with you in a second. Got these skinny pages here. Here we go. Exodus 20. Now, notice the subject of the first number of commandments that God gives. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Now notice, of those who hate me. Okay? You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers, okay, on the children, on the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. All right. So there you have what we usually call the first three of the Ten Commandments. And they all have to do with God. All right. And God's relationship here to the people of Israel, to whom it was giving. All right. Now, when we talk about a name, when we see the name, okay, what is a name actually? Okay, a name was a point of access, and naming or having knowledge of a name was thought to give a person power over another. Now, this comes from Mr. Mounce in his Old Testament studies. In other words, the Jews were to know the name of their Creator and their Savior. Okay, and as you see that, then that would bring them into a relationship with him. So it appears that the temple is God's desire for a temple, all right, is for the sake of his name, so that these people can know who he is and have a relationship with him. Now, we understand that there were certain feasts that Israel had to go to the temple from. And by the way, the law there was that those within a certain mileage range that was convenient would go to the temple. And most folks that lived in Israel would at least get to one of these feast days to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. But they did it for the sake of his name because of what? Well, chapter 19 of Exodus tells us, a priesthood. Peter says a royal priesthood, and then a holy nation. And so all this revolves around the name of God, which we perceive to be Yahweh. And it's different names throughout the Old Testament as Adonai and names like that, okay, that you see. But the whole point of the word name is so that an individual, in this case, can understand who God is and God's desire for them. Remember Thanksgiving, was it last Wednesday? No, I can't remember. Where we did the little study on Psalm 100. And we noticed verse number 4. We're talking about the gates and the thanksgiving coming into the court of God. And we saw that in the Hebrew that thanksgiving was the gate into the presence of God. And that court was actually considered a small room where, in the example I use, where a young man would come and ask the father for the hand of his daughter, and it was done privately. In case the father said no, the boy wouldn't be embarrassed and that sort of thing. But that's the same idea with God. With thanksgiving, we enter into his presence, and it's a one-on-one relationship presence, you see, with nobody else there. And so that was, that's what we try to get across. And so we see that even with the temple idea, because after all, when you read through this, and hopefully you'll do this, all right, go through it, how many people got to go into the temple? It was just the high priest and the priest in their duties of offering sacrifices, lighting the candles, the showbread, et cetera, et cetera. All of the normal people or other people were in the courts of the temple, but not into the temple itself. Okay. And even where the Ark of the Covenant was behind the veil, only one person once a year got to go back in there. And of course, that was the high priest. Okay, the high priest. So the whole thing revolves, if you please, around the name of God and who God is when building this temple. It was to be a city set on a hill that everybody, all the nations could see, which you'll see as we go through the verses here. Okay, so so house for my name. Now, where are we? Let's go back to 1 Kings again, and chapter number 6. All right, chapter number 6. Notice verse 1, please. Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. As for the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, and its width was 20 cubits, and its height was 30 cubits. So it's 480 years after they depart or are delivered from Egypt that finally this house is going to be built. Right? Now, in the meantime, as you go through the scriptures there, you understand that God did have a tent. All right, and we'll see that in a little bit, where David brought the ark out of the tent and brought it into Jerusalem before the house was even built. Okay, but 480 years, how can I say this? How old is the United States of America? Are we 250 years yet? I mean, what's 76 from 22? What do we have? 24 plus 22. So we're pretty close to 250 years old. So we're talking about another 230 years. All right. And I just look at it that way in time frames. I mean, that's a lot of time frame there. 480 years before this house is begun to be built. Okay. So obviously there is a lesson there you can learn, and that's this: that God isn't in a hurry. Okay, he has a plan. He's going to fulfill that plan as we see this. Now, also, let me tell you this. The companion passages to 1 Kings are found in 2 Kings. In this case, the building starts in 2 Kings chapter 2. All right, or 2 Chronicles, rather. 2 Chronicles. You see the companion to this. All right. Now, in chapter 8 here, 1 Kings, if you come over there, we're going to see not David, but Solomon's prayer. Okay, Solomon's prayer. Now, this is where the ark is actually brought into the temple. All right, the temple itself, and the temple is let me see if I can find that. It starts in 6, the building of the temple, goes through 7, and then it's prepared there in verse number 8. It's all ready to go. So then in 8, verse 1, then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the fathers' households of the sons of Israel, to King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the city of David, which is Zion. All the men of Israel assembled themselves to the king Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethtamin, which is the 7th month. Then all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark. They brought up the ark of the Lord and the tent of meeting and all the holy utensils which were in the tent, and the priests and the Levites brought them up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who were assembled to him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen they could not be counted or numbered. So they appeared as if when the ark was coming in, they were already sacrificing. Okay? For the cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubim made a covering over the ark and its poles from above. But the poles were so long. Now, these are the poles that they carried the Ark of the Covenant on. But the poles were so long that the ends of the poles could not be seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone which Moses put there at Horeb. where the Lord made a covenant with the sons of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. All right. So if you picture this, the priests carrying this ark, sacrifices are going on, and they're placing it into the temple. Now, verse number 10. Okay. It happened that when the priests came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Now, this also happened when the tabernacle was dedicated, if you want to use that word, right? And not even Moses could stay within it, Moses or Aaron. So this is the second time in the Old Testament that you see this, all right? That you see this. Then Solomon's going to address the people here, okay? Address the people. So let's pick that up in verse, let's see. All right. I'll tell you what, let me read a couple verses here, 12 and 13. Then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick clouds. I have surely built you a lofty house, a place for your dwelling forever. Now, that's a great statement that he makes there. A place for your dwelling for how long? Forever. But watch what happens now. I'm turning the page, okay, as we look at this. And let's pick it up in verse 17. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. Where was it? It was in his heart. Remember Sunday I asked the question, what is God most concerned with mankind? And I got a few answers from the folks that were with us, but I believe it's the heart. And we'll talk about that this Sunday, by the way, okay? So the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, because it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. So God commended David, even though he wouldn't allow David to build a temple, but it was in David's heart. So God commended him for that, if you please, all right? Then I come down to verse 20. Now the Lord has fulfilled his word, which he spoke. For I have risen in the place of my father David, remember Solomon speaking, and sit on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised, and have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. There's that name of the Lord that's going to keep repeating itself. The reason that temple was built was for the name of the Lord. You're going to read later on in the prophets, God did not desire sacrifices, but yet what went on in the temple? Sacrifices, and we always perceive that was for the forgiveness of sin, etc., etc. Okay, but it's very interesting as you see that. Now let's let's do this. Come down to verse. We have a prayer dedication beginning in verse number 22, but let's come on down to verse 26. Now this is Solomon standing before the altar of the Lord, and he's praying here, okay? In 26 it says, now therefore, O God of Israel, let your word, I pray, be confirmed, which you have spoken to your servant, my father David. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Question mark. Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house which I have built? Exclamation point. Now, isn't that amazing? Solomon realizes, I built this house for God, but he realized that he can't be contained in that house. Okay? Y'all follow that? Now, let me keep going. Yet have regard to the prayer of your servant and to his supplications, O Lord my God, to listen to the cry, to the prayer which your servant prays before you today, that your eyes may be open toward this house night and day, toward the place of which you have said, my name shall be there. Now watch why. To listen to the prayer which your servant shall pray toward this place. Listen to the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel. So not just of Solomon's prayers, but of Israel's prayers. Okay? When they pray toward this place. Now, it doesn't say they're in that place, but toward that place. Here in heaven, your dwelling place, hear and forgive. So what has Solomon just said? Hey, we erected this giant, this we saw the dimensions of it earlier, all right? And he put this place up for God's name, the name of God. But then here, what does he say? Again, okay? Here in heaven, your dwelling place, hear and forgive. Come down to 32. Then hear in heaven and act and judge. Now come over to verse 34. Then hear in heaven and forgive the sins of your people. Come on down to 36. Then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, etc., etc. Come down to 39 with me. Then hear in heaven your dwelling place. So what does Solomon know? He knew what I did not know as a fundamentalist looking for the future temple to be built so God could come and dwell there. But how many times so far? Okay. How many times so far has he said here in heaven? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. Come down to verse 43. Here in heaven, your dwelling place, and do according to all for which the foreigners call to you, not just Israel, but the foreigners, in order that all people of the earth may know your name, to fear you as you do your people Israel, and that they may know that this house which I have built is called by your name. So even back with Solomon, the temple was meant for not just Israel, but who? People all around, as it says here, okay? So 44 then tells us, when your people go out to do battle against their enemy, by whatever way you shall send them, and they pray to the Lord toward the city which you have chosen, and the house which I have built for your name, then hear in heaven their prayer and supplication and maintain their cause. Now, I don't know what because I just presented this to you, but as you read through this, you get some, you get an idea here that Solomon understood what most Christians don't understand. And when we get to the gospel accounts, and, we'll see next week about Ezra. Zerubbabel is actually the one that rebuilt the temple. We call it the Second Temple. Okay? There's never any indication that God actually came down there. And you get that indication when you go to the gospel accounts? No, you don't. All right? That's why it was such a problem for Israel in Jesus' relationship to that temple, because he was drawing people to whom? Himself, which we'll see. Wherein Israel thought that people should be drawn to the temple, which was built for what? The name of God. Okay? Now, let me do this. Turn the page backwards here. Yeah, let's notice 48. If they return to you with all their, now notice, heart, and with all their soul in the land of their enemies who have taken them captive, and pray to you toward their land which you have given to their fathers, the city which you have chosen, and the house which I have built for your name, then hear their prayer and their supplication where? In heaven, your dwelling place. So what is Solomon doing during his prayer here as the people of Israel, however many are there at the dedication there, and there's a lot of people, all right? What's he telling them? We built this place for the name of God, to be a testimony to those in Israel and those of the world, but where does God dwell? According to these passages, he dwells in heaven, or the heavens, okay, as we see this. Now, when you get to verses 54 to 61, what you actually see is my Bible has Solomon's benediction, and that's actually what it is. It's the end of the prayer. But come on down to 57 with me. May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our fathers, that he may not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to him, actually to himself, to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his ordinances, which he commanded our fathers. Then slide down to 61. Let your heart, therefore, be wholly devoted to the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as at this day. Okay? As at this day. So it's a wonderment here as you read this. At least it is to me. Okay? As we go through this. And what is God concerned about? Their hearts toward them. And Solomon knows that and understands that because of the wisdom he's been given by God. Okay? That what God is interested in is the hearts of men. Okay? The hearts of men. And I often wonder if their hearts would have been right toward God if the tabernacle would have been just the tent, in other words, would have been enough for God. All right? But evidently, their hearts weren't, so what has to happen? This building that has to remind the people, because not everybody can see the tent or tabernacle. But Jerusalem, city on the hill, with that huge white building that we call the tabernacle, could then be a blessing to these folks if they what? Had a heart toward God. See, realizing that their prayers are going where? To heaven. And we read a number of places, even if they were out in battle or preparing for battle, that they would face the direction of the temple and pray. All right? Because it was given for God's name. But where was God? He was in the heavenlies. All right? As we say, in heaven here, as we look at that. All right? So I think that the heart plays a great role all through Scripture. And what I'm going to attempt to do on Sunday, all right, is manifest that in the life of Samson. Okay? In the life of Samson. And I'll share that with you. It wasn't the cutting off his hair or anything like that made him weak. It was a heart matter, and which we'll see. So this is just a taste. I just wanted to give you a little taste. And again, I apologize because I could have had you read it, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, to read this and underline this sort of thing yourself. Okay. But I'll tell you what, as long as we're here, come over to 2 Chronicles 7. Let's just do this. 2 Chronicles 7, please. All right. And this happens when Solomon is finished praying. Chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. He says, now when Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. Now that's not recorded back in Kings, but it here is in Chronicles. The priests could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled the Lord's house. So the temple is the Lord's house. It was built for his name. That's what we have to understand. Okay. And it appears that during the time of the feast days, all right, and of course they all lasted 8 days or so, the feast when the Jews came to present themselves before the Lord, that he was there for a certain period of time. But as you read through the Old Testament, and after Solomon dies, what happens to the kingdom? It splits, and then something disappears from the temple. Even though some of the kings, all right, did offer the sacrifices and things like that. And I find it interesting when, as you read down through the scriptures, that Josiah, remember the priests found the scrolls from the temple, okay, and they celebrated the Passover for the first time in hundreds of years. So it's not a given that this continued on in their lifetime, okay? But that house was still built for one purpose, right? God's name, so that he could manifest himself in a relationship with individual people, not just of Israel, but also of the world, as you see that, okay? And we talked about that last week a little bit in Psalm 100, all right, Psalm 100. So I'm going to leave it there with you for tonight, okay? And we'll continue next week. Now, if you'd like to, read the book of Ezra. Ezra was a good old boy. I mean, he was he was close to God. He was a scribe. He knew the law, but he did not rebuild the temple, okay? That was done by Zerubbabel and a number of other gentlemen. And we'll show you how the three kings up there of Persia, okay, we want to call them that, okay, helped in the building of that temple. So it's all very interesting. That's the second temple, and that's the temple that you read about with Herod. Herod took that temple and he rebuilt it. Remember, it took 30 some years to do that, and the Jews asked Jesus, hey, 30 some years it took. Are you going to rebuild it in 3 days? Of course, he was talking about himself, wasn't he, in the resurrection? So it's all, to me, it's a wonderment as we read this. And as we get into the New Testament with it, we'll see how there was a friction from the leaders of the Jews and Jesus Christ in relationship to the temple, because they understood something, which we'll show you. They understood that he was teaching, he was going to take the temple's place. Okay? And who am I speaking to tonight?
The church, the temple.
Temple. That's right. Each of us is a temple being put together, Ephesians chapter 2, right? For habitation of God. So listen, it's a great thing. It is a good thing. Sometimes we lose sight of these things because, you got to go back to the Old Testament and read it and that sort of thing, but we'll have a good time. So any questions or comments?